Okay, well, you will notice a different background and a different sound quality. That is because we are out because of potential flooding. Now, I don't think the campus is going to get flooded, but I do not have a good video set up at my house. So I'm currently recording this on Dr. Clemens's phone, which is set up on something. And so might as well use this time to get videos done because as close up on me as y'all are time wise, time's a wasting. So the next section, and this is a long enough section, I do believe it is going to be a twofer. It is called There Is No Alice Paul, There Is Suffrage. So we are continuing on with that first section. And Alice Paul is a full-on historical badass. You need to know that. It is so hard for me to not watch myself on this screen. It's really easy to do when I'm in my office, but at home it's like, let's look at the screen, let's watch myself. Even with their parades and yellow bunting, American women were far more conservative in their tactics than the suffragists, although in England they were suffragettes, in England, who were willing to smash windows, throw rocks, and get arrested. In the most spectacular act of British militancy, Emily Davison threw herself in front of the King's horse during the running of the English Derby in 1913, achieving instant, if gruesome, martyrdom for the cause. And I mean, that feels pretty weird because typically when we think about British people, and this is a stereotype, British people and how emotional they portray themselves, we tend to, again, stereotypically think of them as being very reserved. We do not think about British women literally throwing bricks through windows and getting arrested because they wanted the right to vote. It's just kind of mind-blowing to me. And there is actually a movie, I don't know how old it is, it's been in the last 10 or 15 years, and it's called Suffragette, and it is about the British suffragists. And I've watched it, and it is a pretty good movie. It actually does show the scene where Emily Davison runs out on the racetrack and flings herself. And I don't know that she was necessarily trying to die. I think what she was doing was trying to put a suffrage banner on the King's horse, and she just ended up squashed. It's just all there is to it. Alice Paul, the last great leader of the American movement, spent her political apprenticeship with the English suffragists. Alice Paul actually got arrested in England several times during their suffrage fight. Then, like Harriet Blatch, she moved home and dedicated her life to the cause. And when I say she dedicated her life to the cause, if you keep reading, you will see how much she dedicated her life to the cause. I lost my place. When Paul dedicated herself, she went all the way. Although she was a voracious reader who eventually earned 3 law degrees, for a long time she refused to read anything except tomes, that's books, on suffrage, lest her attention be diverted. And as I'm reading this, I tend to wonder if she is just that determined or if she is somewhere on the spectrum with that laser focus. But, of course, she's been gone since the 1970s, so no way to find out. She was another one of those charismatic female leaders like Jane Addams, who was both powerfully assertive and tantalizingly remote. A magazine writer assigned to produce a profile on the real Paul concluded in despair, and here's our section heading: There is no Alice Paul, there is suffrage. Paul seemed uninterested in things as mundane as food and refused to spend more than 30 cents a day on meals. And, at the time that's reasonable. Now that would get you like a stick of gum. Always small and frail looking, she was so single-minded that one of her political opponents was convinced her lack of nutrition had drained her sanity, calling her an anemic fanatic. And of course, that's even today, when people disagree with other people politically, they call them things like fanatics or deranged or whatever. The calling them insane is the go-to to basically indicate that as far as you're concerned, they have nothing to say because they're crazy. Paul hated the state-by-state strategy. I don't blame her, because that is like a long, slow crawl through molasses and oatmeal that has been left out for 3 days, trying to get what you want. So, I mean, and it's not like anything is happening quickly anyway. Remember, this has been going on since Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Susan B. Anthony back in the 1860s, and we're 50 years in at this point. Trust me, nothing is happening quickly, and the state-by-state thing, not really making things any faster. She believed women would never win the right to vote without a constitutional amendment. She might not have been wrong, but there was no sign Congress was prepared to pass one. Woodrow Wilson, I have no use for him, when asked his opinion on suffrage during the presidential campaign of 1912, dodged grandly. Oh, look, a politician dodging something important. Can you imagine? Ladies, this is a very arguable question, and my mind is in the middle of the argument. Is that a non-answer or what? On the day before his inauguration in 1913, and 1913 inaugurations were still happening in March. They weren't January inaugurations. They didn't switch them to January until 1930-something is when they moved from March to January. Paul made her national debut with a great suffrage parade in Washington, featuring 8,000 marchers, 26 floats, 10 bands, and 6 chariots. Inez Milholland, we've heard from her before, the beautiful horsewoman who assured young American womanhood that fighting for suffrage provided good exercise, led the marchers astride a white steed. And her outfit was so pretty. Hopefully I can find like a website or pictures or something. But basically, it was a long white dress. She looked like an angel, kind of. I mean, she didn't have wings or anything, but still very pretty. I can tell I don't have much makeup on. I should have at least put lipstick on or something before I started making the video. Over 500,000 people gathered to watch them. Some in favor of them, some not in favor of them. And when the president-elect arrived by train that morning, he was disconcerted to find no crowds assembled to greet him. In his youth, Woodrow Wilson had once called woman suffrage, quote, the foundation of every evil in this country. Yes, women getting the right to vote is the foundation of every evil in this country. He supported the idea that each state should decide the issue for itself, states' rights. The stance that the South, that's us, capital S South, was also pushing because it would allow Southern states to keep the franchise, that means the right to vote, as limited and as white as possible. Alice Paul became one of the banes of his life. But her intransigence, that's a big fancy word for stubbornness, began pushing him closer to Carrie Catt and the mainstream suffragists. Because at some point, you remember Carrie Catt was the one in charge of NAWSA, the North American Women's Suffrage Association. At some point, Alice Paul and her contingent split from NAWSA and formed, I want to say it was the NWP, the National Women's Party. And yeah, big split between what was considered the radicals. I'm sorry, I heard cords moving around, so I'm kind of hoping there's not a mouse in here. And the more conservative, the ones that were all about the state-by-state thing. Sorry, I lost my place. Wilson had always needed admiring women in his life, as some men do. While the nation was under the impression that he was deep in mourning for his recently deceased wife, the lonely president was already courting a successor, because some people just can't be alone. And that's, I mean, it's sad. You want to kind of look at him and go, douche. But, you know, there was a guy I went to high school with a long time ago, and he lost his wife, and they had kids together. Lost his wife to COVID, and I think he was engaged again within 5 months. It was very sad. Some people just cannot be alone. Sorry, lost my place. Women like Catt were exactly the kind he found most sympathetic. Well-to-do, well-educated, and respectful of authority. Staying in her little place. Kat and her friends seemed to understand his problems and find Alice Paul as trying as he did. He and the second Mrs. Wilson appeared at the annual convention of the National American Woman Suffrage Association during his re-election campaign in 1916, and Wilson hinted as broadly as possible that he was coming around. Quote, "We feel the tide, we rejoice in the strength of it, and we shall not quarrel in the long run as to the method of it." The next speaker, in response, said, quote, "We have waited so long, Mr. President, for the vote. We had hoped it might come in your administration." I love this part. I love this. Spontaneously, the entire audience stood and silently turned to face their guest of honor. The president, Kat felt certain, was in their corner. After Wilson's re-election, Alice Paul and her supporters decided to picket the White House. And this, y'all, this was big. This was huge. This was wowzers. The demonstrations went on for 18 months, a year and a half. And I think it was 7 days a week. It might have been 6. I'd probably have to look that up. But either 6 or 7 days a week. And they were called the Silent Sentinels. And they would just literally stand outside the gates to the White House and hold up their suffrage banners. That's all they do. A lot of people didn't like that. And when America entered World War I, Paul resisted other leaders' urging that she abandon the protests until hostilities were over. Instead, the picketers carried banners asking how the country could fight for democracy abroad when women did not enjoy it at home. What an excellent question. They were harassed by passers-by, and after one rough day of demonstrating, Paul was warned that the women would be arrested if they ever returned to the White House. And do you think that's going to scare Alice Paul and her suffragists? No, of course not. Arrests followed. First, perfunctory trips to the police station, then fines, which the protesters refused to pay, and finally, increasingly severe prison sentences. Suffragists were shot at and dragged down the street by people attempting to wrest away their banners. They received longer and longer sentences to Occoquan Prison, where the cells were small, dank, and heavily populated with rodents, and the food was full of worms. And don't even get me started on the first night a bunch of them went in. I mean, this one woman had a heart attack. They were beaten up. It was horrifying what was done to them. And again, if you're a woman and you're not voting, and you know what people went through to get that right for you, feel bad. In October 1918, Alice Paul, serving a 6-month sentence, began a hunger strike, and this was not her first hunger strike, to protest the prison conditions. Rose Winslow, a Polish immigrant who fasted along with Paul, and her birth name was Róża Wencławska, and when she came to America, it got Americanized to Rose Winslow, smuggled out messages to her husband and friends reporting that they were being force-fed by prison officials who poured food into their stomachs via a tube stuck down their throats. They pretty much strapped them down, stuck a tube down their throat, put a funnel in it, and poured like a mixture of milk and eggs, just basically whatever would go down the tube. Sometimes it'd go down the nose, a tube that way instead of the throat. Yeah, force-fed them. Yesterday was a bad day for me in feeding, she wrote. I was vomiting continually during the process. The tube has developed an irritation somewhere that is painful. Don't let them tell you we take this well. Miss Paul vomits much. We think of the coming feeding all day. It is horrible. As women were released, they toured the country in prison garb to publicize their comrades' plight. Democrats began to worry. I think there's a cat about to come in this room. Democrats began to worry they would suffer reprisals in the November elections. All right, I'm at 14 minutes. I'm going to cut it here, and we will go ahead and finish it in the next video.